This week on Quality Digest Live, a new alliance and a new standard aims to cure the epidemic of counterfeit electronic parts in industry.
Plus, can a giant company like Microsoft reinvent itself on the fly? We'll find out when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for August 2nd, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, you've probably had a peek into the records section of your doctor's office, in particular a small office where the records are located in a floor-to-ceiling vertical filing system. You've probably seen that. Sure. You see these things are huge. Sometimes they rotate out and they slide around. Huge number of records, even in a small office. Have you ever thought about all that paper management that goes into that, and more important, the chance for lost records or clerical mistakes or clerical errors, that type of thing? This is the subject of a story by Christine Tremblay, How an EHR System Can Improve Quality in Healthcare Practices. And EHR stands for Electronic Health Records. More than half of small medical practices are still using handwritten paper charts to collect and store patient data. And although every medical office has computers, many doctors never even touch them. Studies have shown that illegible handwriting accounts for an estimated 5% to 10% of medical errors, including misunderstood orders and prescriptions, and that's all according to Tremblay in her article. So paper is a problem, and you would think electronic health records would be just the ticket, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, think of the upsides. Already, they are being used to spot trends in patient data, to spot and red flag, let's say, negative drug interactions. A doctor might enter in a drug prescription, and the records will come up and say, hey, wait a minute, this patient's already taken another drug, you don't want to do that. At nurses' stations, the drug interactions also pointed out there, or when a doctor enters a prescription data into an EHR system and then sends it on to the pharmacy people may have their own flagging system to detect errors. So when these things are electronic, all sorts of stuff can be done. See some other examples, maybe when data information is transferred to radiology or a pharmacy. And like I said, these have their own checks that are in place. On a larger level, let's say, electronic records allow you to aggregate data. We love that word, aggregate.
Aggregate.
Aggregate. Yes. We don't know who you are.
Not aggravate data, but
this data can be used. Aggregated data, by the way, we hear a lot about this, can be used to establish health trends from, let's say, a geographical standpoint. In addition, measurement against goals and key performance indicators can help physicians gauge the effectiveness of a particular treatment plan, for instance. So there's all these benefits that you can get from having electronic records. These also trickle down, let's say, the front desk and kind of easing the process by which people might check in. Matter of fact, some offices might have a web portal where you can, they might give you a call and say, you have your appointment tomorrow, would you mind logging in and making sure that our patient information on you is correct before you even enter the office, okay? So a lot of advantages to it. So this is all really cool, right? It's kind of a documentation utopia. Well, maybe not. And this is kind of the point I wanted to make here. These systems kind of rolled out in the late 1990s and early 2000s. That's really kind of when EHR systems became, kind of really came on the scene. And they suffered from an immediate problem. They were designed by Programmers, exactly. They weren't designed by healthcare workers. And as my wife, a nurse, will tell you, she's used about 4 different EHR systems. Some of these systems were really connected to reality. They followed the flow that the nurses or the doctors used. Some of them did not follow the flow at all. And actually, what you ended up doing is you had nurses and doctors circumventing the EHR system in order to make it do what they wanted. Right. So this caused its own set of problems. So this is really a good case of how not to implement a good idea. My personal feeling is that these EHR systems, as good as their intention was and as good as they are if they're implemented properly, really just came into being because there was some quick money to be made when EHR became kind of the buzz term. A lot of money to be spent in the medical profession. And these things were just rolled out too quick without doing what? The voice of the customer. Right. What does the nurse need? What does the doctor need? What does the patient need? How do we set up an electronic health record system that really meets the needs of what the government's looking for and sort of in the case of traceability, what the doctor needs in terms of being able to have something that's quick and easy to use, what the nurse needs, what the caseworker needs.
That aligns with HIPAA.
That aligns with HIPAA.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
See, that's the thing. Actually, they do align with HIPAA. But that seemed to be their only concern, is that HIPAA concerns were met and so forth. But in terms of how you enter data, it had nurses and doctors jumping all over the place.
But what I'm saying is by circumventing it, are you still in alliance with HIPAA? That might be an issue here too, is because you have loose paper floating around everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is, Tremblay talks about this pretty well in here. EHR is a good idea, but as with any type of product, you have to have the voice of the customer, in this case healthcare organizations. They need to be really involved in the design of them. And more important, if you are a healthcare organization and you're looking at EHR, you really need to test it and not just have your quality control person test it, which is what happens a lot. You need to have your nurses test it, you need to have your caseworkers test it, you need to have your doctors test it, and everybody sign off that, yeah, this actually is making my job easier, not more difficult.
Yeah, and we've all seen doctors write out prescriptions. I don't know how anybody ever reads those things. I mean, it's like
my patient. I don't know how anybody can read my records when I fill out my patient information.
Yeah, so I mean, paper, as we know, all these flaws. But again, a system's only as good as the ease in which you make it work. So
voice of the customer.
Check it out. Right on. Okay, thanks, Derek. All right. Also in the news this week, the new version of ISO 9001 has now reached the committee draft stage of development. That means that we're beginning to hear of some of the changes to the language and structure of the new version of the standard, which is due out in 2015. According to an article, you just saw it right there, written by Denise Robitaille, which ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, the draft of the standard now features 10 sections as opposed to the 8 found in the 2008 version. Most of the section names have been changed, and some of the information in those sections has been truncated, expanded, and or clarified. That's what happens when we have a new version of the standard like ISO 9001. Right. Now, several important proposed changes to the text of the draft. Again, this is a draft. I'm going to point that out again in a few moments.
Right.
Some of these proposed changes, well, all of them carry weight, but some of them carry a lot of weight. For example, the term product will no longer appear. It's going to be proposed to appear. It's proposed to be replaced by the phrase goods and services, and this is interpreted as making the standard more applicable to service organizations, which, as we know, are increasingly representing a much larger percentage of ISO 9001 registrations. And another nod to service organizations, some of the language in current Section 7, product realization, has been pared down and placed in the new Section 8, operation. Also in the draft, it's proposed that the term continual improvement be replaced by improvement and top management replaced by leadership. So I want to circle back on this. Remember, this is still a draft.
So it sounds like just a lot of language changes.
There always are. It always is. But again, the language points to intent, and the intent here, I think, primarily, again, from this very, very early draft that we're getting word of, is that they're going to try to do a much better job of embracing service organizations, getting away from a focus on product and getting into goods and services being emphasized there. And I want to reemphasize, this is a draft. There's a long way to go. This version of ISO 9001 isn't going to be finalized for more than another year. 2015 is going to be the release date of this thing. So, we're going to be following this. And there were some comments on Denise's article about this as well that started to kind of critique some of the things. Well, bear with it, folks, because there's going to be a lot of twists and turns on this road over the next year and a half as we see this come to fruition. If you want information on this and you want to check out Denise's story, it's in the player page right down there. You can check out that article as well as the other articles that Dirk and I are going to be covering. And we want to point out that there's a webinar on this topic as well. I believe it's next Tuesday, August 6th, from Peyton Professional. You can check that out if you want as well. And again, look in the bottom of your screen right down there and check out Denise's story as well as information as to how you can register for that webinar. Again, it's next Tuesday, August 6th. So check that out.
All right. Actually, we had another quick news story we're going to do here, but I think actually I'm just going to. I think we're going to kind of blow past that. We're actually kind of running a little long, and I want to give some time actually to our next guest here. Yep. Let me just kind of skip down here a little bit. We were going to have a little news story on kind of how the number of miles driven by people
Yeah.
has really decreased from 2004. But I think actually a story on counterfeit products might actually be a little bit more interesting. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to another something that we haven't done before. We're going to have both an in-house guest and we're going to have a Skype guest, and we're going to talk about counterfeit products. Counterfeit electronic products. So in the last couple years, we've actually written several stories on counterfeit electronic products and how they have really had an effect, or having an effect, potential catastrophic effect in aerospace, in particular,
right.
in military. And we're going to have a couple people on the show with us to talk about this. First, we're going to have Stan Salat. Stan, actually, why don't you give us your title? You're better at saying it than I am. It's very long.
I can truncate it. It's the International Electrotechnical Commission for Quality Management of Components, Electronic Components.
Okay. And you guys are responsible for what?
We're responsible for the USNC, the United States National Council, which oversees the International Electrotechnical Commission activities here in the U.S.
Okay. And also we're going to have on the show with us via Skype is Todd Kramer with Secure Components. Hi, Todd. Oh, I think we're missing the audio there, and Todd.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, we hear you, Todd. So Secure Components is one of the first companies to be registered to a new standard, the AS 6081, which is a electronic counterfeit component mitigation standard, I guess,
Right.
is what
Right.
we could call it. Okay. Oh, well, before we get into it, before we get back to Todd here, as we said, Secure Components is the first company to be registered to AS 6081. Some of our readers had a question regarding an article that ran this week that was authored by yourself that dealt with counterfeit components, and they said, why are we even buying components from Asia or overseas? Why don't we just buy from reputable electronics components distributors and vendors right here in the United States? And there's kind of a bigger issue going on here. Why don't you kind of explain what the problem is?
Thank you, Dirk. And that's a very good question. The reality is 80% of electronic components come from Asia. And further to that, we are dealing, particularly in the military avionics world, we're dealing with a lot of older components that aren't really manufactured anymore. They're called obsolete parts. And the only place to find them is, generally speaking, outside the U.S. now. So we're really scrambling to find older technology, which is the bigger issue here. New technology we buy from new sources.
Sure.
It's new, it's right out of the factory, it's not as much of an issue.
And if I understand the problem correctly, is you might have a military contractor working on some sort of piece of obsolete electronics. He needs to order some components that are no longer manufactured, or even the company that manufactured may not be in existence
Right,
anymore.
right.
But they still have to be. That is the part that's spec. That is the part that has to be put in, right?
That's correct. Each part is uniquely approved by the FAA and the system itself.
So they can't just swap in an equivalent part, so to speak.
You can't go get a Kemet capacitor to replace a Vichy capacitor. It has to be the one that's been approved.
Okay, and that's kind of the issue, is finding those obsolete parts. So Todd, let's come back to you. Tell us a little bit about who and what Secure Components is.
Sure. Secure Components is an independent distributor. We are certified to the AS 9120 and the AS 6081 standard. And our job is to procure components for the Department of Defense, the Defense Logistics Agencies, and aerospace companies when their procurement teams can't find the parts through franchise or through their original component manufacturer. We're basically there to backstop their supply chain.
Okay, so as a small, and Secure Components is a relatively small company, I believe, right?
And we're a small business, that's
okay.
right.
What drove you to undertake being the first company in the world to seek the International IECQ Counterfeit Avoidance Certification? That's the AS 6081.
Right. Well, strictly speaking, it came out of survival. I mean, our sales team was competing with other independent distributors and other brokers who held lower standards in terms of their quality management systems. You know, looking up a part on Google or finding the part in the world is the easy part. Authenticating the part, making sure it's legitimate and what your customer needs is a whole nother story. If buyers continually just look at price as being the ultimate factor, it's a sure bet. It's only a matter of time before a counterfeit component enters into the supply chain. So we went after the AS6081 to basically level the playing field for all independent distributors and brokers.
And Stan, have counterfeit components actually entered the supply chain? And has the military actually spotted, hopefully in time, counterfeit components before they've been installed in aircraft or radar or anything like that? Is this like the sky is falling kind of thing, or is this an actual thing that has almost happened?
Again, a very, very good question, Dirk. The reality is that parts have been found. Counterfeit parts have been found in products. If you read some of the articles that are written, there's evidence of parts falling out of IC sockets that were in fact counterfeit as they were identified. So this is not a myth, it's not a story, it's real. It's real to the tune of about $6 billion in the military per year. And Todd can correct me on this, but I believe that we're talking about roughly 1 million parts, and I forget the time frame, that the U.S. military has identified in their supply chain.
Okay. Todd, I mean, kind of to follow up on what Stan said here, there have been stories, I've seen them, maybe some of our viewers have, on CNN, let's say Fox News, reporting on the growing concerns of counterfeit parts and products in the military supply chain, just as Stan said here. Can you give our audience an example of how this has affected your company, or maybe your clients for that matter?
Sure. Absolutely, there's been a tremendous impact to our company. You know, as an independent distributor, we play a very vital role in sustaining and maintaining legacy applications, especially, as you mentioned, they are using a lot of obsolete components. And franchise distribution cannot supply our customer base with obsolete components. So we sought AS6081 to prove to our customer base that we really were a trustworthy supplier for them, and that they can come to us in times where they can't get their parts from franchise.
And can you give us an example of through what you guys do, you have found parts that were counterfeit? I mean, have you actually spotted this in your own procurements?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Secure Components has been really looking at this inspection techniques and finding better practices for many, many years. But just recently, we had a capacitor that was being procured by a defense contractor. It was supposed to be a Vishay capacitor, and in fact, due to our strict quality codes and inspection techniques, when the parts were finally procured and brought into Secure Components, immediately our quality engineer, quality control, saw the anomalies with the markings. And upon further research, we contacted Vishay, and they in fact confirmed that we intercepted a counterfeit component. And I'm glad to say that we did that before we shipped the parts to the end user.
And Stan, is this part of what the assessment process, the assessment to AS6081 does? Is it looking at companies like, let's say, Secure Components and making sure that they have the ability to test or follow a paper trail? I mean, what exactly are you guys looking for?
We're looking for the ability, the systems in place to first qualify the supply chain, where you can authenticate the parts as you receive them. So maybe you can't authenticate the supplier that you're buying from. And with today's technology and internet buying and selling, reality is that parts are bought and sold and transferred, and they might go straight from a source in India to a Secure Components. So we have to have a place where that's brought to light. 6081 says thou shall do a number of steps. There's actually a set of tests, there's a set of inspections, there's mechanical inspections, visual inspections, decap inspections. It's very rigorous.
Okay.
And the assessment process validates, just like with ISO 9000 or AS 9100 or 9120, it validates that the company actually has those systems in place.
Okay. And Todd, obviously you guys went through this whole process of being assessed. What did you learn through the experience of going through that?
Well, first and foremost, I was really pleased to see that our management team and the intuition that we had was dead on. It took us so many late nights, a ton of will to get through this kind of process because our industry and our customers, frankly, weren't even asking for it. It was something that we were doing up front. But looking back now with the adoption of the Department of Defense adopting the 6081 and all the phone calls and the emails that we are receiving from the rest of industry, I really think that we're on the right path, and we're excited to see more independent distributors and brokers accept this and take this certification into their own organizations.
And what about from the assessor's point of view?
From the assessor's point of view, I think Todd's understating a piece of this. When he says long nights, he was preparing for an assessment that had the American National Accreditation Body involvement. It had the International Electrotechnical Commission involvement. It had industry involvement. As it came together, there were 4 witness assessors, 1 assessor, and Todd's company. From our standpoint, it validated what was good in the standard, what was needing additional work, and SAE is actually the standards creator, so we identified things there. All of that was able to go back to the committee, G19 from SAE. It also identified some of the weaknesses in the assessors because in many cases you're not really looking at physical material because it comes and goes. You're talking quantities here of 1 or 2
Right.
to hundreds or even a few thousand. So it's a very different assessment from a standard quality management system. It was a real learning.
Okay, well, Todd, Stan, we're about out of time here, but Todd, congratulations on being the first company, Secure Components, to achieve AS 6081 certification. Great job, man.
Appreciate it. We're quite proud, and it gives us pleasure to be able to lead the industry and have everyone else look at us and follow suit.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, thanks, Todd. And Stan, thank you also for joining us here.
Pleasure.
And safe travels back to Eugene.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, our next story. Some of you probably saw this in the news. Microsoft is going through some reorganization. I guess you might call it consolidation. And here to tell us a little bit about that is Mike.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, and thanks again, Todd and Stan. Great piece there on Secure Components. Yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, well, yes, Microsoft. Will Microsoft's reorganization pay off was a piece that ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Came to us from Knowledge at Wharton. We run a lot of stuff from Knowledge at Wharton. Always good knowledge from Knowledge at Wharton, as it happens. So this was an interesting story. Microsoft is reorganizing their company, and what they're doing is they're scaling back. They're scaling back from essentially 8 operating units down to 4. And this is, of course, a big story. It's a big story for anybody in industry, and certainly for those of us that deal with quality assurance, performance excellence, and customer-facing processes, because, due to its size, due to its long-standing success, of course, Microsoft is one of those bellwether companies. I guess you could consider them a bellwether that everybody looks to. Everybody kind of benchmarks against Microsoft for good reason, because of their lengthy success. So Steve Ballmer, this was about 3 weeks ago, on July 11th, Steve Ballmer wrote a 2,709 word, I counted them, counted each one, 2,709 word memo to the team, to everyone at Microsoft, explaining what they were doing and why they were doing it. This went out again on July 11th, and I read it, and Knowledge of Wharton linked out to it if you want to take a look at it in their story and read the comments from Ballmer to his team. So why were they doing this? Why were they going through what is a very extensive reorganization? This isn't a light project. This is going to be a heavy-duty deal. So why are they doing that? Well, they had a lot of overlapping reporting structures. I mean, hey, Microsoft is a humongous company, right? They're going to have overlapping reporting structures that they're trying to cut back. More importantly, I think in the customer-facing side of this, they're having a little bit of traction problems with some of their product lines. Certainly within the smartphone division, tablets, the gaming division, as well as search. You know, Bing is the Microsoft search engine. And all of those are struggling. There's hey, I don't have to tell you, there's some huge, great competitors in all those markets. And Microsoft was having a bit of trouble getting traction within that. Of course, their bread and butter is what? PC market, right? Right. Their operating system. But the PC market really is shrinking. Gartner reported earlier this month that there was an 11% decline in worldwide personal computer shipments for the second quarter, which ended at the end of June. So, hey, that's an issue for Microsoft, right? I mean, they're seeing the slipping in their core business, where most of their profitability comes from, and they're trying to react to that, trying to be more nimble, and trying to streamline a lot of their processes and eliminate waste. But let's remember something. Microsoft is a $74 billion company, $74 billion in revenue, and they had a net income last year of $17 billion. That's approximately a 20 to 23% profit margin. This is a fantastically successful company, right? I mean, they by any measure, by all measures, they're doing very well, but yet they still felt the need to make this change. So what can the readers, what can all of us in quality assurance really gather from this? And that I think that it's important to know that no matter where you are in your company's life cycle, wherever you are in the success chain, you need to be more nimble. You always need to be pushing the envelope in terms of being better able to streamline your processes internally, but more importantly, serve your customer base better, right? I mean, that's really what it all comes down to. In quality assurance, we know that nothing means quality if it doesn't mean that there's better delivered product or service to your customer, right? So I think that was the intention from Microsoft. They said we're going to streamline, we're going to serve our customers better, but not everyone, I think, agrees necessarily that is what this is going to lead to. And there's some good points made. And there was actually a quote that I want to read to you. It was a response to this article from a reader, Mike White, who had some good comments on this. I'd like to put that up on the screen so that the audience can see that. And this is again from Mike White. I hope I'm wrong, but in many ways this reconsolidation sounds like a step backward toward one behemoth organization too difficult for any one team to manage. This can lead to an excess of top-down direction too removed from the lower action levels, with people working on objectives that do not mean much to them in their specific jobs. Having a product line-oriented business versus one overall big one works well if the supporting functions, including technical development and procurement, can be well coordinated among the separate agile business units. What's agile about a single large entity? Mike, that makes a good point. Mike White makes a good point there, and I actually tend to agree with that. I think that Microsoft is not going to be more nimble by taking 8 humongous business units and condensing them down to 4 humongouser business units, right? I mean, that's going to take top management that much further away from the customer. Essentially, it's going to further, I think, remove the ability to really understand and react quickly to what's going on. I have doubts. I have doubts about this one. I'm not sure. I think that it's. I don't want to say it's an error of desperation, but I mean, there's a sense here that this is something they felt like they needed to do. Again, there's amazing competitors in these spaces that Microsoft's playing in. They have to try to do something. I think they feel like they were not nimble enough. So this was a response to try to be more nimble. I hope it doesn't, but I could see it potentially backfiring on them in terms of getting further away from the customer-facing operations, which is really what's going to make or break the company.
Right. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming they're responding more than anything, probably responding to Google.
Yes, yeah. Responding to Google, responding to Apple. I mean, like I say, these are not small competitors. Right. You know, back 20 years ago, Microsoft was the king and had a lot of people nipping at their heels. They're not the king anymore. Right. I think that they're one amongst equals, maybe not even equals anymore. So this is interesting. We're going to keep an eye on this one, and I think we all will. To kind of see what they're up to. Okay. All right.
Well, actually, I think we're darn near the end of our show.
We are, but I want to do the tweet of the week because this actually.
You want to do the tweet of the week?
I want to do a tweet of the week, and if I can, because I think this actually relates to what I just talked about.
Okay.
And it comes to us from the Harvard Business Review, and this says, they say, remember the 2 pizza rule. Any team that can't be fed by 2 pizzas is too big. The tweet in question here links back to an article appearing earlier this week on the HBR website, 5 Ways to Innovate Faster. And that particular quote comes from a rule of thumb established by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and referencing the article that I just covered ends up maybe being a wise bit of advice for the consolidated Microsoft, right? I mean, they're right. You know, as you get these teams to get bigger, maybe it's too big. And Microsoft may find themselves in that circumstance. So that's our tweet of the week. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at twitter.com/Quality Digest, and keep tabs on all of our numerous quality and management-oriented tweets. And if you have something appropriate for the tweet of the week, just retweet it to us at Quality Digest.
And we'd like to wrap up with the latest ponderings from Mike Micklewright, one of our favorite columnists. Matter of fact, I think he has a column coming up next week.
Yes, he does.
But the ponderings are a lot of fun. We're going to let the show play out with his latest ponderings from Mike Micklewright. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, have a great weekend. And thanks again, Stan and Todd, for joining us on the show as well.
That's right.
See ya.
Did you ever wonder why we like to batch so much? We all do things in big old batches, whether it's the laundry, the dishes, our bills, or even the way we take vacations or sleep at night. We're all batchers. Hell, I'm even a son of a batcher. Now, we can even shop for our groceries in big old batches, all at one of those new mega warehouse stores, and buy huge batches of food to store in batches in our own homes. I suggest that these stores now be called House of Batches, but I digress. One thing I really like is all the samples they provide. I used to prop my daughter up on my shoulders, and she would pretend to be the captain searching for food, and then she would yell out, "Samples!" I always feel guilty about eating the equivalent of an entire lunch in the store for free, so I always pretend that I really like something and tell my wife that we really need to buy it because it's so awesome. I then feel better and I eat more samples. It works for both me and the store, but I've digressed. One thing I don't like is the way the nice people serve the free samples on trays, in batches. I'll pretend to be one of those nice people. They always start off with doilies, and they keep the tray back here by themselves, and they line up the tray with all the doilies until it's full, in one big old batch. Then they take the food item. In this case, we're serving nice cheese balls today. They're naturally and artificially flavored, but they're monstrously cheesy. They always tell you something nice about the product and why you'll like it. And occasionally you'll see them doing something like that. Meanwhile, all the people are gathering around and they're waiting for their food. They're getting a little annoyed because it's taking so long. And the nice person won't put the tray out there until he or she is completely finished with the tray. Finally, the tray is put out for display, and the people attack like vultures. And they bump and grind and move each other and kick each other. Then they go into their corners and eat their food. Someone needs to teach those nice people about single-piece flow so they don't turn a positive experience into a negative experience. Otherwise, in my opinion, they're all just daughters and sons of batchers, just like me. I'm Mike Micklewright, the wise guy.
Thank you.